almost as if in
I'm recording now, just in the mid sentence. We just started, so keep going.
So yeah, the estuary is this vibrant place, almost like, you know, am I muted?
No, we can hear you. Job's muted.
Oh, in where it almost makes me think of like, an estuary is essentially like, it makes me think of Avatar and like their whole world. Like their whole world is essentially a giant global estuary where there's tons of diversity, but they all they all start they all work. That's a nice one. But they all work in harmony together. So it's multiplicity and unity. Like that's what an estuary is. However, like that's essentially my idea of what a church should be. However, Paul seems to frame it such that the estuary is separate but parallel, or maybe like connected somehow to the church, but yet he seems to say like all the life and all of the energy and the river is flowing from the church. But I'm just like, how does the full and vibrant life-giving thing feed off of the thing that has none of the multiplicity and life and vibrancy? Like, I just don't quite understand how those things work. You know, I don't know. I probably said it better in my short question.
Yeah, I can't remember all the details of Paul's answer, but one of the thoughts that I had off of that, Luke, because I've had that same thought, is, you know, the framing that Paul provides is that the life is coming from the direction of the place where he is in, right? The church itself. And so that makes sense to me, that a Christian pastor who is devoted to all of these things is saying from a truth, the only thing that you can say from a truthful perspective, if you are being true to where you're coming from, which I believe Paul is yeah, this is where the source of life is coming from. And, you know, I think the conception is, yeah, the church is the source of this because the source of the church is Christ. And in a Christian pastor's frame, the source of life is Christ. So that's where everything is flowing from. Now, I can also see the perspective of Christ is not only flowing from the church, right? There could be another conception. There are other conceptions. That Christ is also flowing from the ocean in the other direction. So depending on a little bit of the perspective, thinking in terms of like Christ as a universal figure,
yeah,
Christ can come from all different kinds of crazy directions. It's not necessarily flowing just from one direction down into these other places. And so I can see where the thought process that you're driving, where your question is coming from, Luke, is just like, well, the conception of estuary in general seems to have a little bit of I seem to have a little bit of an issue with that, because it necessitates that the quote unquote goodness is flowing from one direction to the other. I think maybe Paul's conception would counter that a little bit to say, no, there is the fact that I want estuary is I know that there's goodness coming from the other direction, and it's coming into this place that I'm calling estuary, and this mix is creating something, or exposing something, or revealing something new and different and important. I wanted to talk to you guys about this. We haven't done any kind of formal intro, but it's my intent that we would post this online, because I have had some thoughts about estuary just kind of rumbling around in my mind and haven't known how to articulate them. And so I started putting this little slide together. I'm assuming that you guys can see this.
I can. Looks
so this stemmed from something that happened on the Discord, where I saw Sam post this a few days ago now, where he's like, what is this whole estuary business about? And there was a unpublished video where Sam kind of talks through his thoughts on what estuary was, or kind of what it needs to be, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I responded to this and was just like, oh yeah, I think I understand estuary completely as far as how Paul is framing it. And then I was like, but I don't know that I can explain it. So maybe I don't understand what it means. And then, even more so, some of my thoughts on estuary are like my vision of what it is, how it works is also just completely, well, at least half of it is closed off because of all of COVID-19. And so Sam was like, well, we'll leave that outside and just, cast your vision on what this looks like. And then Andrea jumped in a little bit later and said, hey, I noticed that you mentioned that you had some thoughts on this. I know Andrea's curious about it too, because, she's found something in the Bridges of Meaning server, and in her conversation with Paul, she had just talked about, hey, this has become church for me. And Paul is very reticent to say, no, this is not, this is not church. But there are a lot of people who are like, well, yeah, this is. And especially with the coronavirus, it's been magnified. And it's like, what we know as church right now has become so much more, those of us who have either been attending church or had just started attending church for a long time or just started attending church, that's kind of what's normal has been taken away. And so it just makes this online stuff even more so very easy to become church for people. So it's a long preamble to just take you through some of these slides. I had originally thought about just doing my own video on this, but I just don't feel comfortable doing my own videos. And I like getting your responses. So here are just some things of what estuary is to me. I think the big overarching thing in my mind is an estuary is a place to know and be known, because that's been my experience with this word that Paul has come up with to explain it. It's had different names as well over the last year or so, since we've been certainly doing the Bridges of Meaning Discord, but also even before that with Paul's videos and Jordan Peterson's videos and many of the things that are related to all this. Sorry. I think John Van Donk and Paul were working on something called like a outer court ministry, or Conversations on the Edge was a branding that they were looking at for trying to do something within the CRC. So it's had different names, and I'm not sure if it is just one thing, but that was the overarching thing. But here's some things that are deeper that I have noticed in just conversations that we've had and interactions on the Discord. But it's a place where people can tell true stories, and I think about estuary is even like the Bridges of Meaning podcast conversations, the Discord conversations, Joe, that you have with people. But we also ask this when somebody first lands on the Discord, and this is what Paul asks when he first has a conversation with someone that reaches out to them. It's more about, how did you find us? What brings you here? What have your struggles been? What are you wrestling with right now? What are you looking for? And this last question that I see right here isn't really necessarily one that I ever see or hear overtly asked, but I think it's something that I at least hear myself ask, maybe even subconsciously. Is like, can anyone help? Is there anything that I know of that can help either connect an interest for this person, or is there a way that I can help with something that they're struggling with, or I don't know. So I don't know if anything that I've talked about so far resonates or makes any sense to you guys.
Yeah, no, I relate to it a lot, and I think that's true. That's kind of I think we've talked about that before. Why? So a couple thoughts. Paul has said repeatedly, that he's the I don't know what does he say exactly? It's something like, I'm a subpar pastor of a failing church or something, but yet of a moderately, relatively successful YouTube channel, and a YouTube community and a Discord community, and then coordinating with Vervaeke and Peugeot Boyce and these kinds of people. So, and I've said before, I think it is precisely because of this kind of stuff. And I think Paul, I don't know, interestingly, I think one of the reasons Paul isn't as successful is like a I don't know, not Bishop Barron so much, but why he hasn't blown up a lot is precisely because he does these kinds of things. It's precisely because of his randos conversations. It's because Paul is specifically not trying to increase his status and his reach. And I don't know, I almost feel like he probably intentionally tries to subvert it sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's wisdom in that, and I think that's because Paul understands that humility is the way forward, and anyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted, that type of a thing. It's not the way that one should operate in the world, I don't think. And so this, to me, it's interesting that all these are questions, right? Which is, and I think if they're authentic questions, I would argue that that's what that's doing, is creating space and potential. It's the divine feminine. It's a manifestation of the divine feminine to create space for people to, as Paul often says, and as I like to say too, to say what they really think. I think that's what this community has been for people, is a space for people to say what they really think. Now, my issue with Estuary Church is that my whole critique of the Western American churches has been that they have done the exact opposite of that. They have created a culture where people don't say what they really think, and they just give you the Sunday school answer because of the overly domineering and controlling narrowing of confessionalism, because if you say something out of these confessional bounds, you are outside the camp, which creates spaces where people don't say what they really think. So that's probably my bigger concern, is that and the last thing I would say is that Ferdy had, I think in promo link dump external, I just looked it up, he had summarized, I don't know if you guys saw it yesterday, I believe, kind of after some of these conversations, he had summarized his ideas about estuary, which had to do with like, the narthex within the church and things like that. And I thought it was really, really great. I was gonna, I'll send it to you guys after this. But he had like a couple different tweets, or not tweets, comments within the Discord that I thought were really, really great, and bringing in Peugeot and things that I think are really helpful in this discussion too.
All right. Well, yeah, I didn't get to see that. I did see some responses to what he had posted, and that they were, taken really well, but I didn't get a chance to see them. There might be some overlap here. Then we'll see. These are basically just my observations of this whole phenomenon as I've been watching it. So, as a place to air unpalatable, scare quotes, thoughts, it's a place where I've experienced trying to have some raw honesty, and it has not necessarily, at least in my experience, been met in a bad way. This is what you were saying before, Luke, give and receive space, that divine feminine idea that you were talking about. It's a place where, if you want to, there's a lot of opportunities to try to understand. It's easy sometimes, well, I won't go into those details. It's a place where you can ask questions. It's a place where you can have some opportunities to try to steel man and offer fair-minded disagreement. And it's a place where you can work out your own issues. Some of these ideas for me are aspirational. Like, some of this is what estuary could be, should be, et cetera, et cetera. But these are some things that I've seen. I've seen other times where this just hasn't worked as well. And I think that's a part of any time you bring people together. But it's a place where, I don't know, there's at least more opportunity to do things like these than there are in other atmospheres that I've been in, particularly in church. Another observation and experience that I've had is a place to build deep relationships where I've been able to share, struggles, particularly with you guys, but with other people in the Discord as well, and also hear about those things too from others. Place to share, things that light up our salience landscapes, some common loves to encourage each other on the journey, and some opportunities to even bear with for me and maybe even grow to appreciate the rough edges of other people. So again, these are things that I think can be done in church, but some of the models and how churches have set up make it very hard for these things to happen, where I feel like what I'm calling estuary, I'm referring to particularly the Bridges of Meaning Discord and the things that have happened around Paul's channel that make those things easier. It's a place for feedback, self-reflection. You can crowdsource for expertise or just for other people's opinions for what you're seeing and what you're dealing with. And if you're willing to receive, some constructive critique, you'll certainly receive some non-constructive critique too, but it's all in, you take the good and you take the bad. It's a place for enemies. Paul in his conversation with Andrea talked about, the kind of the white flag of parlay, where two warring tribes can kind of come together and say, all right, well, the thing we know we're going to do in this zone is we're not going to kill each other. But in that self-reflection, if people are willing in this space, we can also say, well, wait a second, am I the enemy? Why am I at odds with this person? I've seen some of this stuff unfold on the Discord. I don't know if you guys have or haven't, but I've seen people going at each other and then eventually working out the fact that, yeah, we have differences, but now I'm kind of getting to know this person a little bit better and I'm starting to enjoy them. What does common ground look like? What does healthy disagreement look like? And can I convert? So you could take that two ways. You might be able to take it more than two ways. Can I convert? I think sometimes my approach, especially when it's something that I'm sure I'm right about, is what can I do to convert this person to my way of seeing things and actually getting it? But another sense, a deeper sense, a sense that resonates more with me is, can I convert myself from looking like an enemy to this person into looking more like a friend, and vice versa? There's a George MacDonald quote that I won't pull up or won't try to read. I love to do quotes, but where he talks about this very thing. There's just like, hey, there's a cloud of enmity between me and this other person, and it's fake. I'm not saying it's unimportant, but it's like a mist that is making it hard for me to actually see the truth. And the truth of the matter is, this is another human being who I could connect with on so many different and deep levels, but there's this fog between us that's kind of making that impossible because we're focused on the fog. It's a place to build trust. I've seen this where people can feel like they can be vulnerable. It's a place where you can be challenged to be patient with other people and kind of give them an opportunity to get to a place where they can be vulnerable. It's a place for honesty, for pain and forgiveness. There are some people who leave the leave the Bridges of Meaning Discord, at least, because they, for whatever reason, it just wasn't a spot for them. I've seen people leave because I'm not trying to diminish it, but I'll just use this term, they'll rage quit the Discord. But they'll also eventually come back and they'll start to have very rich and important discussions with people who otherwise, they left over before. So it's a place to learn. Oh my gosh. Learn about new books that you've never heard of, that you wonder, how have I never read this book before? And it connects with you on so many levels, life lessons, movies and TV shows, various, traditional media and new media, people dumping links all the time, and poetry and prose and profound thinkers, wise sages that are out there somewhere in the public space that you've never heard of before, but also lower status wise sages who you otherwise never would have connected with. Mystics, materialists, philosophers, peasants. Yeah, you'll find all of this there in an estuary. So that was all what an estuary is to me. What an estuary isn't, or at least shouldn't be, in my estimation, is a place to defeat, to dunk on people, to bring you can do all these things. It's there. You're free to do it. To dogpile, to antagonize, to dishearten people. Yeah, people do this. It happens in the estuary, but this isn't the heart of what the estuary that I've been a part of with you guys really is. This isn't what we're looking for. This is available out there. This is available on both sides of the estuary, the sea and the church, to use, Paul's framing of it. You'd get to do all these things in both of those places. The estuary, at least, is a place where you can do these things, but the culture of it seems to not really be all that interested in growing these things, or just turning it into a place where this is just all that happens all the time. I think a lot of people would be out of there if this were going on. A place for lying. So again, you can do this, and you can come and not present your true self, try to undermine other people, to pretend or to falsify things. And I talked about this a little bit with Straw Man. Of course, all of these things can happen, but I don't think that this is the heart of estuary either. A place to do harm, to defame or embarrass people, or to make them look bad. Again, there are places where this has happened and can happen, and I'm sure will continue to happen, but it's not the heart. Again, same theme, a place to dominate the conversation with your ideas. The more you do this, at least on the Bridges of Meaning Discord, the less interaction you'll start to get. To dominate with your ideas, to try to impose right think, or to just dominate other people, or to bring in political ideology. This is one I'm not sure about. Like, there will be a lot of political ideology that comes in, but there will also be a lot of challenge to, if you are an ideologue with your frame, particularly around politics. At least in our Bridges of Meaning Discord, I feel like you will get a lot of challenge if you're on one end of the political ideological spectrum. And I feel like you won't get as much pushback if you're coming from the other side. So if you guys want to talk about that more, we can, but I'll leave it at that for right now. Again, another thing that the heart of it is a necessarily religious space. And again, I use the little scare quotes there on religious space, because the religious is a word that fudges. It's creed light, it's doctrine light, it's polity light. It doesn't have all of these strictures or structures in place that would kind of force a lot of ritual is the wrong word, but just ways to act. We don't have a long charter of this is the type of behavior where you'll get kicked out if you do this, and this is the type of behavior that you have to adhere to stay in. I haven't felt like we've needed that. I haven't felt like the admins on Bridges of Meaning in particular have had to do very much policing, for lack of a better word. Some people think that's a bad thing. Some people have had a lot of criticisms about that to the admins. So where does estuary manifest? it can manifest in real life. If there's no COVID-19, this is my vision of in real life manifestations. Churches. Oh, go ahead, Job. You got something to say?
This is kind of difficult to read. If you present this somewhere else, the pink on green is just kind of hard on my eyes. Sorry.
Sorry about that. I'll just read them all in case this is difficult to see, or because this is difficult to see. So, churches, abbeys, if such a thing still exists. There's one in Thunder Bay, or apparently there was. Houses or donated spaces, parks, public spaces, conferences, retreats, where shirtless volleyball would be optional, shared meals, and then I'm just in the neighborhood visits, announced visits, right? Things like these are things that I've observed, or at least things that were planned. You know, hey, Jeff, I'm going to be in the neighborhood of Texas. We should meet up, and we did. Or, you know, both of us actually. And Job, I know that you've had visitors too. And one thing that I left off of here was like treks. So places to go together. You know, the estuary would result in, hey, let's all take a road trip and meet up somewhere, or let's take a road trip and go to one of these conferences. So things like that. Virtually, YouTube, Discord, Zoom, Voxer, various other social media platforms, and even the edge of the technology landscape. This is where Estuary could instantiate, right? There are technologies out there that either we don't know about or haven't been created yet that could kind of help foster this. And then this is my last few slides. What Estuary could become. Let's see if this coloration is any better or worse, Job. So something that Estuary could become, and maybe already is, a mess. Heated, disruptive, hard, chaotic, counterproductive, confusing, decayed, but I think most important from my perspective, disembodied. The embodiment is the part of Estuary and all of this experience that I have noticed has been hugely lacking, and in a couple of different ways. You know, I've expressed before that the church experience that I have is I never make any deep, meaningful connections with people that I go to church with, and there are various reasons for that. Probably the majority of them reside in my own hang-ups. But what I've also found through this experience is a place where Estuary, as I've known it so far, is lacking is I don't have, and I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. There are people who I am closest to in my actual personal life, you know, people in my household that I can't bring into the Estuary. I don't know, it wouldn't work for them. They're not interested in it. They can't connect with it. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I do know that sometimes I long to bring people into the Estuary to have these kind of discussions. And I just know that it wouldn't work, or it wouldn't be a good fit, or they've told me, yeah, I'm just not interested in, in those kind of things that you're telling me. Maybe on the more positive side, yeah, maybe not. It could be a movement. It could be a movement toward growth and peace and healing just at large for the world if it somehow became more and more of a thing. Healing, of goodwill, of understanding. It could be a means for further up and further in, to take from Lewis. You know, in the framing of the Estuary as Paul has presented it, it could be a place where sea creatures come out from the sea and they land in the Estuary and they start to learn more things. And they're like, oh, well, I thought people from Christian churches meant these 5 or 6 things, and those are things that I don't want to be involved with. But I'm starting to learn that, wow, some of these things that are Christian and are Christian rituals and are more upstream in this direction of the church that's feeding into this estuary are things that I am interested in moving closer and closer towards. So it could be a further and further up and further in. Or in the opposite direction, it could be a down and out. It could be a place for nuns and duns to say, oh, well, these are the things that I only knew from my church upbringing. But now I'm starting to see that there are all these atheists out there. There are all these agnostics. There are all these people, maybe even from other religious traditions, Buddhists. I don't think that we've had necessarily anybody from Islamic traditions that have made their way into our particular estuary, but I'm not precluding that from being a thing, to where people who have just come from one particular tradition and background can now go out there and see this whole world open up and have a better sense of, I feel like I need to move out of this church construct that led me into, and then I stumbled into this estuary, and then more out there into the sea. Maybe it's not as scary as I was told it was. And I think you could kind of have this come from both directions. A means for belonging and a means for true love. Love of other people, love of enemies, love of new vistas or landscapes or ideas that had never been presented to you before. And then a model, maybe a model. Again, this is aspirational for unity, for what unity can look like beyond Unity 2020, the Weinstein's project. A model for reconstruction versus not versus deconstruction, but maybe post-deconstruction. I feel like there are a lot of people who are in post-deconstruction phases that make their way into the estuary, or in the midst of some kind of deconstruction of something, whether it's their agnosticism, their atheism, their particular worldviews, no matter what their worldview was. For renovation, for revitalization, for innovation, and I just threw this in there for you, Luke, for iconic vision. And then just a last closing slide. These were just some other random thoughts that came to mind. I don't really even necessarily know what they mean, but a framework for a particular spirit. Luke, you mentioned a divine feminine. There's certainly a divine masculine too that can go way back, but just a divine spirit, whatever that might mean. A place to get away with things. There are things that I can say and do in the estuary that I certainly could not get away with in church, small groups or something like that. I'll just leave it at that. A place for the small o unorthodox. A place to be challenged. A place for thick skin and broken or breaking hearts. A place for careless words and careful response. And I just did this. This is a re-emphasis, but a strong feminine spirit is something that I have seen. And that's a willingness in the Bridges of Meaning server to receive and to offer shelter and to help people to grow in whatever direction that they need to grow, and then purge. Maybe they need to get out and go away. There are some really important and helpful people that I've run into that have just had to leave the Discord because it was no longer right for them or what they needed anymore. And then the last thing that came to mind was a no-kill shelter, and it's just that whole idea of parlay again, where it's just like, we're we're not here to knock people out or to kill them. So anyway, that's my long version of my random thoughts about what I've been thinking about in this whole estuary discussion.
Hit it, Job.
It's kind of like a series pitch for Cheers.
Where everybody knows your name.
Exactly. I haven't even watched that series. It's not on TV here, but
I would love to have more real life beer drinking though.
as I said before, I'm horribly cynical towards this whole estuary idea. I think first off, you're going to run into a problem called humanity. People overall aren't very willing to constantly be debating shit. I mean, I think on the Bridges of Meaning Discord, we pretty much, if we haven't already, hit the maximum of people who want to nerd out about this stuff all the time. We have 1,200 members and a very small group that's really active. And I don't know how you're going to have a place that remains vibrant if, like, you have salt water and sweet water, and they meet, and you have this kind of brackish chaos. And then, okay, so the order kind of retains at the fringes, and sometimes there's some cross-pollination. That's the idea I get. Okay. I have no idea how you're going to do that in a digital realm, because the greater internet asshole theory applies, and people are we can't engage with each other very honestly via text, at least not right away. It takes a certain kind of person. Sorry, I'm starting to become vague. I think you need chats like this, face to face, and voice chat, and ideally offline, face to face. But even then, I mean, let's say I go to some place, I just want to yak about something like the discussion we had earlier. I just want to yak about something I've been thinking about. Well, I mean, not that everybody cares, or I go somewhere and I just want to have a beer, and then there's some high level discussion going on between two people who think very differently about certain parts of Christianity or the Judaic religion. I won't name names. And like, oh, that's I don't know if I want to listen to that, because that's going on. Just aside, it's very easy to be cynical. That's just great. Shooting somebody's ideas down is easy. So I'd rather not be. I'd rather be very positive or constructive and say, hey, maybe this can work. But I worry that Bridges of Meaning is kind of a unique fluke that happened very particularly, very special, through certain things that occurred in this last couple of years, with Jordan Peterson doing his thing, and somebody poking Paul saying you should get on YouTube, and Paul thinking about Jordan Peterson, and starting his channel, and through his channel and indirectly through Peterson and Vervaeke, more people coming in. So I think that's going to be the hardest challenge for this estuary. How do you make it an estuary if your channels, if your inbound sources are limited, if they're not diverse? Because then you're going to run into the same problem that most conferences have, most book clubs have, if it's a problem at all, that you breed monoculture, because as eventually any community will what's the term for when you add cold and warm water? You reach an equilibrium eventually. Eventually you reach a stable, and sometimes something happens and you get a splash, but I don't know how you keep that going. You need to constantly have new things happening if you don't want to reach equilibrium, because people will find their echo chambers where they agree. Sometimes they'll interact. But even in a church, let's say you have a real church, there's a narrative that we all kind of agree that, yeah, that's true. If we don't, we schism. If you're Protestant, you just create your own church with blackjack and hookers. But you still sort of have the narrative of God, Jesus. Is Jesus God and is God Jesus? Yeah, maybe we can talk about it. But you understand what I'm getting at? It's a lovely idea, Jeff, but I'm very I don't think it'll happen. I really don't think it'll happen, and I don't think that bridges of meaning, because we've had discussions with the bridges of meaning server, like what should it be, what should it become, where should it go? Well, maybe it won't be more than this, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's fine. Maybe as broken humans, these filthy rags, this is the cleanest they're ever gonna get.
So, and I'm out. So,
Mic drop.
mic drop, mic tap. Um, so I don't know. I think that's potentially true. So right away, when we started, a few days ago, we had a Discord voice chat about estuaries, and I don't know. I think I was being cynical and doing a little shitting on the idea a little bit, also saying that I basically what you said, Job, is I think potentially it's a specific particular instantiation of a spirit and this random phenomenon where because I do agree. I think it was a number of people who embody a particular spirit that coalesced around Paul after the YouTube algorithm served up, Reformed pastor speaks on Jordan Peterson, and then Jeff and you and me and Julian and Mary and Karen and all these people just came in right away. Michael, whomever else I'm forgetting, and it created, and then the local guys there with Paul, in Sacramento, and it just created this culture that's pretty awesome. So maybe that is a special thing, and I'm thinking somewhat, the spirit moves where it will. How do you, you know, you can't see it's coming or it's going. So how do you manifest and control and try to manufacture or husband the wind? It's somewhat hard to do. However, like Joy was saying, somewhat, I think somewhat rightly, is um, maybe it won't be easily replicable in like an assembly line kind of machine replication where it's going to happen exactly the same every time, but maybe you try to replicate it in as best you can with as much wisdom and discernment as you can, trying to cultivate all these things that Jeff laid out, which I think are beautiful. Like, I think all of those things I would agree with really well. I think all of your bullet points were really great. And then it manifests where it will. Maybe you try to start, I don't know, the embodied thing is important too, but maybe you try to start 100 online communities, just, and maybe 4 of them work. Cool. That's 4 more that that didn't used to be. Maybe a bunch of them will be failures because everyone is much too quick, because the predominant culture and in America is to get groupthink around certain ideas and to get an equilibrium where you have a binding and blinding orthodoxy where everybody thinks the same, and if you think anything different, you're excluded from the group. Well, that's not an estuary. So maybe 96% of them will end up as that, and that's uncontrollable. But maybe the 4 start to build momentum. I don't know.
Sure. Maybe my earlier wording, I don't think fluke is the right term. I should have used anomaly.
Yeah.
But I don't think you're wrong, Luke. And what there is a pattern in bridges of meaning that I think we might be able to exploit or reuse, is that often people come in and say, well, why are you here? Well, I'm wrestling with this and this and that, and I'm thinking about these new ideas. And then the key phrase that tends to follow is, and I have no other people to discuss this with.
100%.
And that's what we've often been. I've had people talk to me who are basically just bursting at the seams. Like, I just need to voice these things that I'm thinking and I am stuck in my head. Yeah, I mean, that's why I contacted Paul. Like, can I please talk about this stuff with somebody who seems to be in the same space? So then the question remains, how do you reach those people? Right now it's pretty organic. And, I've tried this with my church. Like, hey, you want to talk about this sort of stuff? Come meet at the fire department. Look, not a church. It's safe. Let's come talk about this. Wasn't very successful, to be honest, but stuff like that, perhaps. Right.
It's also a narrow band of people with, I mean, largely like when we talk about big five stuff a lot on the Discord, there are some commonalities, definitely. You know, it's usually people pretty high in openness. You know, it's just going to be a draw for certain people. But you know, the thing is too is that's not always completely the case. Like I've even seen that, you know, with you, Jeff. You're not as high in openness, but I think because of the relational dynamics that I think were there within Discord. I think, I mean, I don't know, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you were drawn in more, not so much because it was just bandying about ideas, but because of these relational dynamics and people drawing you in relationally. And then I don't know, I think Jeff is a great example of someone who I think you are not necessarily the norm, or what I would call the norm of the Discord, but I would say I think I've almost Jeff's a great example of someone who I'm probably closest to within the Discord too. But I've seen him almost blossom and open up and evolve and grow and I don't know. Like I feel like I've really seen you evolve and a lot of your gifts and strengths really come out in your time of being on the Discord, honestly, which I'm really happy about, you know? And so like there needs to be that, which is what I think the face-to-face Zoom chats are about, the voice chats, because when it's just the lowest resolution and least meaningful and deep part of Discord is the general chat. Like that's just, and sometimes it could be fun. Sometimes it's lighthearted. Sometimes we're joking around, which is an important part of the community, which is cool. But when it's just like debating ideas that go to the forum, that's the least interesting part of the Discord, in my opinion.
Some of the most interesting parts, I think, I think I've articulated this example before in another conversation that either the three of us or I've had with one of you two before, is there's a dynamic where when a video goes out, someone out there finds their way to the Discord, and then reaches out to one of us, and I'm sure other people, you know, they might reach out to people where it's just like, oh, I want to talk to somebody who doesn't put themselves out online. I'd rather stay in the shadows and talk to another lurker or something like that. But there's certainly this dynamic that happens where people will reach out and want to have a conversation, or they will come into the general chat and just say, hey, yeah, I was one of the people that just talked to Paul. And there's immediately that connection point for anybody who has actually seen this person tell a little bit of their story. And I don't know what I'm trying to articulate here, but there's just something very, there goes the Discord, very new. And I don't know what I'm trying to say, but do you guys get a sense of what I'm talking about, or am I just making no sense at all?
No, I think there is that. There are people, but that's again just another manifestation, I think, of people saying, "Oh, this is a place where I can say the things like Job was saying that I've really wanted to say, where I found no place in resonance for it." And I think people see a video or something that has some salience that pops up to them, something that the muse, something shines forth that they see, that they connect with, that relates to them on a deep level, and they're like, boom, I'd love to talk to you because I want to. I think that's what it is. There's a inarticulable spirit that someone sees through something they say, and they say, I want to do that. Like I want to have that Tolkien or that Lewis relationship of OU too, and I want to participate in that energy, in that spirit. I think that's what that is.
I think we might have said all we have to say about Estuary for right now.
Well, that's good because my battery's going to die. I have to pee.
I hope I'm proven wrong. Really, that'd be nice.
I don't know. So the biggest, I've maybe said this to you guys before, the thing that I think is most wrong with the world now, and that I don't know, I'm simultaneously hopeful about, but yet also I have a lot of dread about, is I kind of think language doesn't work anymore. Communication doesn't work anymore. People aren't talking. People aren't saying what they really think. We're not having earnest conversation. We've basically so mechanized language via technology and disembodiment that, I mean, this is kind of my techno babble idea, that we can no longer meaningfully communicate. And I think the Discord and Paul's channel has been a reaction, train against that. And I think the Estuary is an attempt to try to replicate that. I'm hopeful that that happens, because I think if it doesn't happen, the world is going to devolve into violent revolution. So, so I am hopeful in that sense, because if language doesn't work, the only thing that's left with people who disagree when they can't talk about it, I mean, this is Jordan Peterson. This is tyrant. There's three options when you disagree with someone: tyrant, slave, master slave, or work it out using words. That's it. That's all you have. You have masters and slaves, or you have people that talk about it.
I don't think those terms are okay these days.
Well,
No, but I don't know. The whole language thing we'll need to talk about again, because yeah.
Right.
I got nothing else, man.
different Estuary chat.
We'll end this with a bang.
Not with a whimper.
All right,
guys.
Thanks, guys.